While our foreign minister Wadefu, with the help of the Tagesschau, wants to convey to the municipalities how important German foreign policy is in further progress towards the Gaza Strip and peace, and that Turkey should also exert a pleasing, polite influence and pressure on Hamas. Yes, the actual players have long been at work, and that in New York, completely without Germany, completely without Turkey, and also without the EU. What this is about, we'll take a closer look. With that, welcome to Warum Pankritisch mit Lil. Think clearly, decide for yourself. Yes, I have to tell you very honestly, the research for today's video was as good as finished. I got the most important information here from Reuters. And this morning I said, okay, come on, you look again very briefly at the Tagesschau to see what's new, and then I really fell off my chair, right? It actually says that our foreign minister Wadefu, who is now traveling to Turkey, wants to put pressure on Turkey so that it in turn puts pressure on Hamas, right? So Germany sees itself as a very important player in the whole area of the Gaza war, or permanent peace, right? Wadefu and consorts are really convinced that Germany plays a decisive role. But Germany plays just as little a decisive role, as I said, as Turkey and the EU. Ursula von der Leyen is out, Friedrich Merz is out, all are not invited. To where? Namely to New York. And that's where the real game actually begins. Because in New York, in the United Nations building, 3 countries are currently working out a resolution. And it's actually about the whole topic of Israel and Gaza. The 3 states that are actually sitting at the table here in New York are the USA, France and Great Britain. Why France and Great Britain in particular? Quite simply because both have a mandate in the UN Security Council. Germany does not, as we all know. Yes. And the EU can't have it anyway, right? That's already obvious. And the question is, of course, who initiated the whole thing? This initiative to work out a resolution. I'll get to its content in a moment. This initiative did not come from Netanyahu. This initiative actually came from the states saying, okay, come on. We would like to work out a resolution here so that there can be a lasting peace, that you also have a corresponding troop to monitor the whole thing. Ultimately, and it was the Americans who actually invited and asked France and Great Britain to participate in this resolution, to work it out accordingly. Now, of course, one could say, oh my God, you can still put Ursula von der Leyen somewhere as a consultant, or Friedrich Merz, right? Doesn't have to be in the last row like last time. But then they said, no, Germany is definitely not. They are considered much too hesitant. They are more likely to step on the brakes, yes. And Ursula von der Leyen, the Americans are not so enthusiastic about anyway, right? And we can assume that Trump has already exerted a lot of pressure and said, just keep von der Leyen off my back. And one thing is of course also possibly possible, that Trump quite deliberately brought Macron in again. Because of course he is trying to bring a certain division back in, right? He will certainly tell Macron, okay, you can stay in the EU, but make sure that you distance yourself a little from von der Leyen politically and emancipate yourself, right? He would of course most like to completely smash the EU, that's perfectly clear. But Macron has 2 great advantages in terms of the internal market, i.e. within the EU. On the other hand, the EU as such is of course increasingly strangling France, right? We all know that. But in any case, it's already crumbling in other places within the EU, right? As far as the drones are concerned. There, France and Germany have already positioned themselves against giving up power in Brussels here, right? With regard to this drone forest or drone wall that is planned here. Although the name has already been taken away again. But I'm digressing again. Let's go back to New York. So precisely because Great Britain and France have a permanent mandate in the UN Security Council, and on the initiative of the Americans, they are now working out a resolution together with the Americans. The Americans also trust France and Great Britain because both countries have military experience in UN missions, right? In Lebanon, Mali, Kosovo, Iraq, and also in Libya, both countries were also involved. And another reason, of course, is that both countries also have a military presence in the Middle East. So the French have bases in Jordan and the Emirates, and the British in Cyprus and in Bavaria. And both countries have always maintained diplomatic relations with both Israel and the Arab states. And Germany is considered too hesitant by both the Americans, i.e. Tehran, Washington, and Tel Aviv. And in both countries there is also the feeling that Germany, since this new government under Merz has been adhering very, very extremely to EU guidelines, right? Especially with regard to health policy. And they are not so happy that Germany is focusing more and more on the EU and seeking diplomatic talks, less with Israel and also less with Washington, right? And I mean, all the actions that have taken place in recent times, the undiplomatic behavior with regard to the ceasefire that Trump achieved, that Germany did not recognize in any way, that of course speaks volumes, perfectly clear, right? Let's briefly come to the content. What is actually agreed in this resolution paper? What's it about? It is actually about a so-called multinational stabilization force, i.e., no UN blue helmets, therefore not, because it was actually expected that in the event that one would speak of blame here, that China and Russia would most likely veto it, and they are of course also still in the UN Security Council, as we all know, right? Instead, they want to achieve a coalition under a UN mandate. So legally legitimized by a resolution, but practically organized by the Americans, the French and the British in the end. The model is the so-called KFOR mission in Kosovo at that time, NATO-led, but with UN blessing. And if that could be achieved, according to American media, this troop would be the first Western-led security mission in a Palestinian territory since 1948. It would stabilize Israel's position in the short term, but in the long term internationalize the mandate over Gaza, i.e., remove it from direct Israeli control. Israel would be relieved without US troops having to be stationed there permanently, right? Because the troops that are to be stationed there would be soldiers from states, but also from France and also from Great Britain. Yes, as you can see, even if there is currently hardly anything reported in most media about the ceasefire or the situation between Israel and Hamas, except that the individual battles flare up again and again, and Trump is also stirring things up a bit here again, right? Perfectly clear. One must honestly state one thing. In the background, attempts are being made here to find solutions, a permanent solution of which hardly anyone notices anything, right? Of course, you only notice that if you regularly research international press sources here. So Reuters, for example, is one of the most important sources ever, and also with a reservation, certainly one of the most reliable sources. You have to say that, quite honestly. Of course, you can always do that yourself again and again, but I then summarize or select the most important things. I am, of course, very much looking forward to your reaction. And what do you think of Wade Pole puffing himself up a bit? And is of the opinion that Germany and through Turkey will play a very, very important role here in the Israel-Gaza conflict? And what do you say to such a resolution-related elaboration between the Americans, France and also Great Britain? I am of course very much looking forward to your news and opinions and wish you a good time until the next video. Bye, Dilil.